Imagine coming home after a grueling federal corruption case, only to find your backyard transformed into a raucous party zone. I, Samuel Harper, a seasoned federal prosecutor turned homebuyer, returned to my dream farmhouse in Rosewood Meadows after 30 years fighting white-collar crime. Instead of the peaceful retreat I'd worked so hard to secure, I found colorful party hats scattered everywhere, broken chairs and debris strewn about, and a smirking HOA president pointing to fine print I'd never even seen. A sharply dressed woman documented my shock with icy detachment. What would you do if your property rights were trampled overnight by the very organization meant to protect them? After decades of fighting federal corruption, I finally achieved what had once been a distant dream, a beautiful farmhouse nestled on 3 sprawling acres in serene enclave of Rosewood Meadows. Every detail of this property spoke to years of sacrifice and public service. The wraparound porch offered a breathtaking view of the unobstructed countryside, a stark contrast to the gray, confined corridors of courtrooms and case files. This home was more than just a dwelling. It was a testament to my perseverance. Every inch of the expansive yard, every carefully maintained garden bed, and every stone in the old pathway had been earned through hard work and unwavering dedication. I had spent countless weekends transforming the space into a personal sanctuary, planting a vegetable garden that promised fresh, homegrown produce, restoring the original stone pathways that whispered tales of the past, and constructing a serene koi pond near my favorite reading spot, where I could lose myself in thought. The crowning achievement, however, was a custom-built wooden playground I had meticulously constructed for my twin boys' 8th birthday. It was modest but built with love, a sturdy structure complete with swings, a slide, and a little fort where they could transform into pirates or astronauts. I followed every safety guideline to the letter, using pressure-treated lumber, installing a thick layer of rubber mulch beneath the play area, and ensuring that each component was secure and safe. That day, the sound of their laughter filled the yard, a tangible reminder that my sacrifices had given my family a piece of happiness and security. This was everything I had worked so hard for, a safe haven where I could finally relax, reflect, and truly live after years of serving justice. Yet, the idyllic tranquility of my new beginning was about to be challenged by forces from within the community, setting the stage for a dramatic confrontation that would test the very limits of my resolve. Reluctantly, I joined the local HOA after hearing countless horror stories from former colleagues. Despite the whispered warnings, I hoped that being part of the community's governing body might actually enhance our collective quality of life, not complicate it. Vincent Drake, the charismatic board president, personally welcomed me with a firm handshake and a confident smile. He reassured me, saying, "We only handle road maintenance in common areas, nothing invasive about your private property." His words echoed in my mind, and I felt a tentative sense of security. The $750 annual fee, modest compared to the promise of a pristine neighborhood, seemed like a small price to pay for a community built on shared values. At that moment, I believed that joining the HOA would preserve our newly acquired haven and maintain the property values I'd fought so hard to secure. Yet, as days turned into weeks, I began to notice subtle shifts. While the neighborhood was initially welcoming, the board's influence gradually seeped into every corner of community life. Households were expected to conform not only to building codes, but also to an emerging culture of strict uniformity, one where even the color of your mailbox could be deemed unacceptable. What had once been a friendly association seemed to be morphing into a force capable of dictating personal choices. And although I tried to ignore the early signs, a lingering unease crept in, setting the stage for the conflicts that were soon to come. In the first few months after moving in, I immersed myself in turning my new property into a true sanctuary. I dedicated weekends to restoring the original stone pathways, nurturing a vegetable garden, and even building a tranquil koi pond near my favorite reading nook. The joy of those early days was palpable, until subtle, unsettling changes began to appear. At first, I noticed a slight uptick in weekend traffic. Luxury cars with unfamiliar license plates started cruising along our quiet streets, and on my morning walks, I would occasionally spot catering vans parked near the community entrance. It wasn't long before I discovered that these intrusions were more than coincidental. Neighbors whispered about exclusive gatherings held by the HOA, lavish parties hosted by those in power, from which I've been conspicuously excluded. One afternoon, while tending to my garden under the shade of the old oak tree, I encountered my next-door neighbor, retired schoolteacher Eleanor Jenkins. As I helped her carry groceries, she leaned in with a worried tone, saying, "Thomas, you ever been invited to any of these gatherings?" Last weekend, they had a live band and gourmet food at the Peterson place. It seems they're only inviting certain residents. Her words struck a chord of disquiet within me. I had believed in the promise of community, but now it appeared that the HOA was enforcing a social hierarchy, one that clashed with the very essence of what I'd hoped this neighborhood would be. Shortly thereafter, I received an unexpected notice from the HOA. It was a thin, official-looking envelope containing a single violation letter. The stark text accused my newly built playground of being an unapproved structure that disrupted community aesthetics, citing a clause, Covenant 7.3, I had never seen before. Though I responded professionally with detailed architectural plans and safety certifications, the tone of the letter was cold and dismissive. It was clear that this was only the first of many warnings. Then, one morning, I noticed something even more unnerving. Survey markers had mysteriously appeared along my property line near the oak tree and garden. I removed them, only to have them reappear the next day, now adorned with small, mocking flags. A neighbor later warned me, "I wouldn't touch those if I were you," suggesting that these were not random but deliberate attempts to intimidate me. These early signs of intrusion, though seemingly minor on their own, gradually built into a crescendo of tension. It was as if the HOA, under the guise of maintaining community standards, was systematically encroaching on my property rights. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of a battle that would test every ounce of my resolve. As weeks passed, the subtle intrusions grew bolder. One morning, during my routine walk beneath the sprawling oak that had witnessed countless seasons, I noticed something strange. Survey markers were suddenly planted along my property line. I removed them in frustration, only to find them reappearing the very next day, this time adorned with small, mocking flags. A voice from down the street, that of retired police officer Franklin Miller, warned gravely, "I wouldn't touch those if I were you. Be careful about pushing back. Remember what happened to the Johnsons." It was then that the pattern became clear. The HOA was using selective enforcement to target my property. Neighbors began receiving citations for the smallest infractions, while others in more desirable sections of the community seemed to escape unscathed. The Johnsons, for example, found themselves bombarded with daily violation notices, so relentless that they eventually sold their home at a loss. Not long after, I learned that Richard Keller's own brother-in-law had swooped in to purchase their property. Every day, I received another piece of the puzzle. Official letters cited premium property assessments on my land, a phrase that didn't belong in my deed. The assessments were absurdly high and, curiously, seemed designed to intimidate. I questioned the logic behind these measurements, only to be met with vague explanations and nervous glances from board members. Their selective scrutiny wasn't applied uniformly. It was as if my property was a perfect target for their covert land grab agenda. The mounting citations and relentless surveillance painted a clear picture. The HOA, under Richard Keller's leadership, was orchestrating a campaign of intimidation to force targeted homeowners into distress sales. Each notice, every flag survey marker, was a calculated move in a larger scheme, a scheme that had now escalated into an outright assault on my property rights. Then came the day when the HOA's actions transcended mere paperwork and into full-blown property invasion. One morning, I awoke to surreal sight. Workers were assembling a large, gaudy tent in my backyard, right beneath the ancient oak that stood sentinel over my home for decades. Tables were being set up, and a banner reading "Exclusive HOA Event" flapped mockingly in the wind. My meticulously restored garden had been partially trampled, and my custom-built playground, my children's cherished sanctuary, showed signs of neglect and disrepair. I immediately grabbed my phone and raced outside, my heart pounding in disbelief. "Excuse me, what's happening here?" I demanded, confronting a lead contractor who was busy setting up a bar station near my koi pond. The man, visibly uneasy, mumbled something about having proper authorization, and handed me a document that, upon inspection, appeared to be a forgery. It claimed that the HOA had acquired usage rights to portions of my property for community enrichment events. I stared at the document in shock. My property deed and the original HOA covenant made no mention of any such provision. Determined to protect my rights, I began methodically documenting everything, snapping photos of the survey markers, recording conversations with irate neighbors, and even capturing video of workers reinstalling those pesky flags the following day. I installed a discreet security camera focused solely on my backyard. Every marker, every flag, every unauthorized intrusion was logged with precise timestamps. As I gathered the evidence, a chilling message from a neighbor confirmed my worst suspicions. "Thomas, be careful," he warned in a hushed tone. "The HOA has been doing this all over the neighborhood. They targeted the Johnsons, too, and you know what happened to them." His words echoed in my mind, reinforcing that these actions were not isolated incidents, but part of a systematic campaign to force vulnerable homeowners into submission. By the end of the day, the invasion felt personal. I knew I had to compile every scrap of evidence into a dossier that would expose this covert land grab scheme for what it was. Every unauthorized survey marker, every forged document, and every citation was a piece of the puzzle, evidence that the HOA, under Richard Keller's direction, was bending the rules to their benefit, and I was determined to let the truth shine through, no matter the personal cost. As the weeks wore on, the true scale of the HOA scheme began to reveal itself. In the quiet hours of early morning, I started poring over old HOA meeting minutes and public financial records. What I discovered was astonishing. A series of bylaw amendments, passed in rapid succession, had introduced baffling provisions. Terms like premium property usage rights and exclusive social tiers, which had no basis in our original covenant. These amendments, it turned out, were being used to target specific homeowners for forced sales. Every document I examined deepened the intrigue. Emails between board members hinted at a deliberate strategy. The HOA was systematically applying excessive fines and conducting invasive property assessments on targeted properties, all to pressure owners into selling at distressed prices. I uncovered records showing that several longtime residents had been forced to sell their homes for 15 to 20% below market value, and disturbingly, many of these properties were later snapped up by shell companies connected to Richard Keller's real estate investment group. The pattern was unmistakable. I began mapping out a timeline, linking the dates of HOA meetings, bylaw changes, and subsequent property sales. With each connection, my resolve hardened. The evidence pointed to a coordinated campaign, a financial racket masquerading as community governance, a scheme designed not just to enforce aesthetic standards, but to seize valuable properties for profit. Determined to expose the truth, I secured sworn statements from affected homeowners and compiled a comprehensive dossier of photographs, emails, and financial records. This dossier revealed that the HOA had been diverting funds from community improvements into a separate, opaque, special projects account, a fund that ballooned year over year, even as our neighborhood's common areas deteriorated. Every piece of evidence built an irrefutable case that the HOA, under Richard Keller's leadership, was operating a sophisticated protection racket. And now, with the hidden agendas and financial misdeeds laid bare, I was ready to take my battle to the next level. Armed with my meticulously compiled dossier, I knew it was time to expose the scheme publicly. At the next emergency HOA board meeting, now packed with anxious, outraged residents, I stepped forward with unwavering resolve. The air in the community center was electric. Murmurs of disbelief and anger rippled to the crowd as I laid out every piece of evidence. "Fellow residents," I began, my voice steady yet seething with righteous indignation, "what you are about to hear will reveal the dark underbelly of the so-called Homeowners Association." I displayed documents, emails, and financial records on a projector screen, each slide a damning testament to the board's collusion in a property grab scheme. The room fell into a heavy silence as I recounted how amendments had been passed in secret, how targeted homeowners were fined into submission, and how properties were sold at distressed prices to shell companies tied directly to Richard Keller's investment group. My words pierced the pretense of community welfare, exposing corruption that had been operating right under our noses. Gasps filled the room. Neighbors who had once sat quietly now stood in unified protest, their faces a mix of fury and resolve. A longtime resident, Mr. Jenkins, bellowed, "This is an outrage. How can our community be run like this?" The board members, caught off guard, fumbled their responses, their veneer control crumbling before the evidence. Vincent Keller, once so confidently in charge, tried to dismiss my findings as mere misinterpretations. But when I presented sworn affidavits from multiple affected homeowners, his tone shifted to panic. The revelation of unauthorized fines and selective enforcement sent shockwaves through the meeting. It was clear. The HOA had been abusing its power, exploiting our trust for personal gain. As I concluded my presentation, the room erupted in applause, a powerful, unyielding declaration of solidarity. The collective voice of the community demanded accountability, and in that charged moment, I knew that we had crossed a point of no return. The corruption, once hidden behind polite smiles and corporate jargon, was laid bare for all to see. In the aftermath of my public expose, the atmosphere at the subsequent emergency HOA meeting was electric with anticipation and raw emotion. Neighbors filled the room, their faces etched with determination and outrage. The evidence I had presented, meticulously documented emails, financial records, sworn affidavits, and even security footage, left no room for denial. The board members, once smug and confident, now appeared visibly shaken as the weight of the revelations settled over them. After a tense, heated debate, the board convened a secret vote. One by one, even the most reluctant members joined the chorus demanding accountability. When the final tally was announced, it was a resounding verdict. The entire leadership, including Vincent Keller, was suspended pending a full investigation. The decision sent shockwaves through the community, sparking a collective cheer that reverberated through the meeting hall. As the verdict was proclaimed, long-suppressed voices finally found strength. Neighbors, many of whom had endured years of intimidation, now stood shoulder to shoulder, united in their resolve to reclaim their community. The board's decision was not merely a punishment for abuse of power. It was a turning point that signified a new era of transparency and respect. In that pivotal moment, I could see the hope rekindling the eyes of those who had once felt powerless. The community had risen as one, affirming that when tyranny is exposed, even the most entrenched corruption can be brought to its knees. In the weeks that followed the board's decisive action, a remarkable transformation began to sweep through Rosewood Meadows. The removal of the corrupt leadership was not the end. It was the catalyst for a new beginning. Neighbors, once intimidated and divided, came together to forge a community defined by transparency, unity, and genuine care for one another. At an impromptu celebration held in our restored community center, families gathered in droves. Laughter, heartfelt conversations, and the sound of children playing filled the air, a stark contrast to the dark days of manipulation and fear. I watched with a deep sense of pride and relief as the remnants of the old regime crumbled, replaced by fresh voices advocating for fairness and accountability. Inspired by our collective resilience, the interim board swiftly introduced new bylaws aimed at preventing any future abuse of power. These regulations ensured that every decision was made openly, with all residents given a voice. No longer would any homeowner be subjected to arbitrary fines or secret amendments. Our new guidelines safeguarded property rights, promoted inclusive community events, and, most importantly, restored the balance between progress and heritage. My own property, once marred by unauthorized surveys and invasive party setups, was meticulously restored to its former glory. The custom-built playground that had been the target of such heartless vandalism was rebuilt, not merely as a replacement, but as a symbol of our undying spirit and unity. Neighbors pitched in, sharing tools, resources, and stories from the past, celebrating not just a return of a cherished space, but a rebirth of community founded on mutual respect and cooperation. Standing amid the rejuvenated gardens and the restored stone pathways of my home, I felt an overwhelming sense of vindication. I had not only protected my own legacy, but had helped reclaim an entire neighborhood from the clutches of tyranny. As I looked into hopeful eyes of my children playing freely once again, I knew that our victory extended far beyond legal battles. It was a triumph for every resident who had dared to stand up for what was right. In the end, justice is more than a legal victory. It's the collective will of a community to restore its dignity and honor its history. Our journey has taught us that when we unite against corruption and tyranny, we not only protect our property, we safeguard our way of life. What would you do if your home, your sanctuary, was under siege? Sometimes, the courage to stand up can ignite a revolution that rebuilds everything we hold dear.